using XInclude to retrieve files. So before we dive into XInclude, let's talk about when you would try XXE. Let's say you have a request, and we'll jump to our lab here. Let's say you have a request that looks like this. We'll throw this to repeater. It's normal www URL encoded post body. And so when you look at this, you might think, oh, well, maybe this isn't taking XML. So whenever you see a request, especially an API request, let's say it looks something like this. And we're going to use our burp extension content type converter to kind of make this a little bit easier to see. Let's say it looks like this, and it's common JSON. Well, just because an application accepts or expects JSON doesn't mean that it doesn't accept XML. So it's always worth, when you're doing API testing, to see if the application takes JSON, can I just convert it to XML? And will it just take it? So deleting the root nodes, for example, it's always good to check, okay, maybe the application expects JSON, but they can also parse XML when they're given XML. So it's always important to give that a try. But in this specific case, we see that it doesn't accept JSON, it doesn't accept XML if we set the content type to as such, right? So what you can do in this specific case is, why not try something like this? Let's call an entity that doesn't exist. So we actually need to do entity, and we need the URL encode that ampersand, because if we don't URL encode it, it's going to think it's an extra, or it's a delineation of a new parameter. So when you send this, do you get an error? In this case, we do. Entities are not allowed for security reasons. So this error is key because it's showing that the application is actually parsing this as XML. So parsing whatever we input as XML. Now with XInclude, XInclude is really cool because what you can do is you can use it when you don't have control over the entire XML document. It's really useful in SOAP requests as well too, because sometimes you'll have your data is being sent to a backend service, and that backend service is actually parsing that XML from there. And so if you're able to trigger this error condition, it's pretty useful. So if you have a fuzzing list that you use when you're fuzzing for different types of vulnerabilities, it's always useful to have some type of entity declaration, or excuse me, entity reference that doesn't exist. That way, if you get a triggered error condition, you know, okay, well, maybe it is parsing my XML. So now I can try something like XInclude. So XInclude payloads tend to be pretty standard. What we have to do is we have to go ahead and reference the XInclude namespace first, which we do here. And then from there, we can reference this file via an XInclude parsed equals text and href equals file etc password. And when we reference this, in this case, we actually get the results of the file that we reference in the exact response. Again, the only reason this works in this specific case is because we're actually getting the results of product ID returned to us. If I try to reference a product ID that doesn't exist, test, as a string, it'll say invalid product ID. So without that in-band reference or confirmation, we'll have to do additional types of attacks or techniques to exfiltrate the data out of band, which is non-trivial in this case because we don't control the entire doc type. But in this specific case, it works good because we're getting errors that give us what we want. Well, that's all I got for this video. If you want any more from me, you can check me out on twitch.tv/gar_7. Every Monday and Thursday, I do educational live streams and giveaways, so I'd love to see you there. If you learned something from this video, or if you have any feedback at all, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. But other than that, hope to see you next time. Thanks again.